Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 11 in my deep dive on apologies and forgiveness. And I want to remind everyone to think about the following 4 things, to think about what you would like to get an apology for. You know, someone has transgressed upon you in the past, recent or in the far past. What would you love to receive an apology for? Whether it's your parents or your friend or your spouse or someone, even in your own kids, a coworker, people who have transgressed upon you. And I'm guessing there's at least a few things in there that are pretty big, like I wish my dad would apologize to me for that thing that he did 30 years ago. You know, there's a lot, and some of you might have endless lists of transgressions that you deserve apologies for, that you would love one for. So think about that. Also, think about apologies that you have received, whether they were good or bad. Maybe think about a really good apology that you have received. So think about that. Also, the third thing, think about something that you should apologize for, something you want to apologize for. Another way to phrase it is think about what you would love forgiveness for. And then the fourth thing is to think about what have you apologized for in the past. A good apology, a bad apology. How did that apology go? You know, think about it. Maybe take some notes. And as we're going through this whole deep dive, go back to that, because I think that'll ground you in the experience, because if you have your own experiences to draw from, I think it helps to contextualize everything. Okay, so in this chapter of the deep dive, I'm going to continue to answer your submissions to a survey that I sent out about apologies. And I asked everyone if they wanted me to apologize to them for something. And a handful of people actually asked me to apologize to them as the podcast listener. And so Emily actually submitted something on the survey asking me to apologize to her. So let's get to that. So let's read this here. And by the way, all the other previous submissions, they either said something nice in that section or they didn't respond at all. So I just want to say that. I just didn't mention that every time. But I am reading every single submission for the most part. And I'm definitely reading every single submission where they ask me to apologize. So here we go. Listener Emily. They say, your speaking on Amber was not entirely fair feeling. You were sometimes harsh towards her and discounted the facts when it comes to trauma survivors. Survivors often focus on weird details or react unexpectedly when recounting events, which I would expect you to know as an expert. I was really disappointed, Dr. Kirk. You are somebody who is so compassionate, and there were times where that compassion fell short when judging Amber. She is a trauma survivor. She isn't going to act perfect on the stand, and it isn't going to be a smooth performance. If it was perfectly smooth, then maybe it really would have been a performance. What she did on the stand was real life, real trauma. Please give her some grace for that. End of submission. Yeah. So we've been over other criticisms or constructive feedback around the trial, and what I'll say is that this submission doesn't trigger me because the individual, I don't know, they don't seem scary to me. I guess that's what it comes down to. It's like, if someone's scary, that's when I get scared, and that's when it freaks me out. But this Emily doesn't scare me at all. And I can agree with it. So one, I reacted to Amber Heard probably a total of 20 hours of just her on the stand, and of the whole trial, I made 65 hours of content on the internet. I mean, and really I made probably 120 hours of, maybe 300 hours of content, but I can't even tell you how much I edited out, because so much was happening in the trial, and there were so many kind of boring moments, frankly, that by the time and this is a whole other part as to why this was so time consuming and stressful for me, was that I would watch all 7 hours of the trial, and then I would have on my hands like so many hours of me talking and reacting, and a lot of it was not very great, or it was redundant, or I don't know, because there's so much to say, and there's a lot at stake too, because I was, a little worried about being sued myself because of the high profile nature of it, right? I mean, these are real human beings. This isn't like Star Wars or something. This is, would Amber Heard or Johnny Depp's team or one of the psychologists, would they get a lawyer and sue me for something? I was pretty careful about what I said. And also, and I talked about this, that when I was talking about forensic psychology, it's been a while since I've done that kind of work. And so I had to and it's really complicated. I mean, there's so many details to the psychometrics and the culture and how one interprets and all that stuff. And so it took me a while I should have, but I didn't reacquaint myself with what I had already known in the past. As the days were going by, I was in between going like, okay, what's that validity scale again? And then I'd look it up, and then I'd be mortified with what I said. But anyway, the point is that in all the stuff that I said about Amber Heard, there were undoubtedly some things in there that, and for Johnny Depp too, there were undoubtedly some things in there that weren't exactly balanced or were unfair to the two of them. And absolutely, especially if you're coming at it from a place where you feel like a lot of people are being harsh to Amber Heard. And I defended Amber Heard way more than I thought other people were doing online, especially on YouTube. And I probably fell prey to that at times. When I watched other YouTube channels, I mean, they were just ridiculing her for her behavior on the stand and just painting her in this ridiculous light. And I just remember thinking like, are we watching the same trial? Because this is a woman on the stand who is crying about things that at least she believes to be traumatic and difficult for her, and probably was. And I would hope that it came across that I was compassionate towards her if we believe Dr. Curry's diagnosis of borderline and histrionic, and we believe Dr. can't remember the other woman's name, a psychiatrist that diagnosed her with PTSD, I'm guessing that at least some of that is accurate, that she's on the spectrum of those conditions. Then, yeah, I mean, I have tremendous compassion and care for her. I still worry about her, honestly, because the bullying and the betrayal that are happening all around her. I mean, the sexism and the misogyny. It's one thing to look at her and say, okay, you are lying about this, but maybe not about that, but the way in which the wolves of misogyny came out against her. And if you're not aware of it, you might not be aware of it, but on, TikTok and YouTube and Twitter and stuff. Anyway, point is that were there times when I was probably judging her in a way that wasn't taking it into account? It all depends on if you believe that she truly was abused by Johnny Depp. Because if you believe that, even if you believe it sort of, which I do, honestly, and you believe that she has PTSD related to him, then it would absolutely make sense, and I'm positive I talked about it at some point, but maybe not enough, that when she was on the stand, she's not going to be very polished. She's not going to be very smooth, as Emily puts it. She's going to come across as a little disjointed, as maybe locking in and being stubborn about certain things when she wouldn't be normally, forgetting certain things, being flustered, crying in a way that seems a little off or something. I mean, that's normal for not only trauma survivors, but people who are being actively asked questions about their trauma in the face of their abuser, So it's, did I underemphasize that? Yeah. Now, for Emily, you would like me to apologize to you, but you're talking about Amber. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, what is the transgression against me? Because what you're identifying, Emily, is a transgression against Amber, right? You're not necessarily telling me how I transgressed on you. If I read between the lines, then, and if Amber reached out to me, I would apologize for that. Absolutely. Because apologies are normal, and accidental harm it's normal. And anyway, so for Emily, if I read between the lines, I think and I think this is a big part of the strangeness around some of the anger from people at me, both Johnny Depp fans and Amber Heard fans during the trial, was they were using Johnny Depp and Amber Heard as a proxy for themselves. So for Emily, if you feel like I was discounting trauma in you, if I was making it seem like if you, Emily, were to have a trauma reaction that seemed a little chaotic, that I would discount your trauma, that I would think you were lying, or I would discount what you were saying, then that is a different transgression, right? That is a different issue. And if that's how you think I made you feel, then I do apologize to you. But you're asking me to apologize if I just read verbatim to Amber. So Amber hasn't asked me, I can't communicate with her, but if she ever heard me talk about things, I would tell her if she felt transgressed upon that I would apologize to her. Because I don't want her to feel I don't know anything. And I said that throughout the trial. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I wasn't there. We have several stories that contradict each other. I know enough about memory and about humans and about trials and about life to know that there are thousands of actual truths if we were to have a video camera recording all those incidents. There's no way to know. It's one person's word against another person's word. There's corroborating evidence, and I know a lot of you will point that out, but that is not a slam dunk indication. It's not a smoking gun, So you can derive your own conclusions, but anyone who understands the law, anyone who understands reality, anyone who understands memory, anyone who understands testimony, anyone who understands evidence will tell you that that case was difficult to determine exactly what happened. There are other cases where it is a lot easier to determine because you have a video camera or something, you know what I mean? So, even the admissions from her, Amber Heard, on audio saying that she hit him, even then, it's not clear exactly what they were meaning when they were saying those things, Now, a lot of people agree with what the jury decided, and they weren't deciding that she was abusive. They were deciding that she was, she committed defamation, which is a whole different thing. Anyway, I feel like I'm falling right back into all the trauma of the trial for myself. And I don't use the word trauma lightly. Anyway, so that's not your fault, Emily. It's you're being nice. But if you want me to apologize to you, then yeah, I do apologize to you, Emily. If, similar to what I was saying to previous people, is that if you came to me and discovered me and slowly opened your heart up to me and slowly decided that I was a safe person, that you could trust me, that you could listen to me, that you could, accept what I'm saying without putting up walls, if you could approach me and ask me questions and depend on me in a way, I think if you talked to the average person and said, like, is it healthy to depend on a podcaster or a YouTuber you've never met? They would say, no, that's ridiculous. It's so unhealthy. I don't think that to be true. It can be unhealthy, but it's only unhealthy if it's unhealthy, right? And so for me, I depend on certain content providers to validate me, even though I don't interact with them. When I hear a podcaster or a YouTuber saying something and I'm like, okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Or they're presented with a situation and I'm like, okay, I'm normal. I'm okay. And so for people, and there's not a lot of content providers that do what I do, right? There are many, but not a lot. And so when you find someone on the internet that will have the point of view that I do, and you are looking for that point of view, it's very dear to you. And so for you to watch the trial and to come into it with an idea that Amber Heard might be more telling the truth than what other people are thinking, and I'm just sort of trouncing around and speculating and throwing a lot of things out there, including things that are basically saying that Amber Heard might be lying and that she's not really a trauma survivor or whatever, then that could be very hurtful to you because by circumstance and by vicariously it is discounting your feelings and your trauma. You're looking for a solid foundation of validation, and when I act in a different way, it feels invalidating, and I get that, and that sucks. And if you were here, and that's the thing that is really shitty about content providing on the internet, is that if you were in the room with, I'm used to lecturing and teaching and supervising and therapizing people who are right in front of me, sometimes knee to knee, our knees aren't touching, but there's 3 inches between our knees as we're sitting close together, the eye contact, the body language. And at the very least, I would pick up on your face that something was amiss, and I'd be like, oh, what's going on? And then you would say that to me, and I would be like, oh yeah, totally. Yeah, you're right. And that could absolutely be the case. Amber Heard could be telling the truth. Or I would hear your feedback and I'd be like, I hadn't thought about that. Let me think about that. But the way that, the asynchronous nature of the, podcasting and YouTube stuff is such that you could be having that reaction for hours and I won't know, and I can't adjust. Plus, there are literally thousands of people having different reactions, but I'm okay with that. As a professor, as a family therapist, as a group therapist, I will have several faces that I'm looking at, and maybe only one person is having, they're scrunching their face up going, huh? But I can react to that, but I can't in this format. And so you could be listening to me and bothered by me for a long time, and it could be literally months before I become knowledgeable about the fact that you've been scrunching your face progressively over the past 3 months, and that's a shitty feeling for you. That's a shitty feeling where you're just like having this pain and no way of responding to me, and two, no way for me to be able to make it up to you or to make it right. You know what I mean? So I know how that feels, and I'm sorry about that. And I do hear you that bias, I'll just say bias, was present with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and I've already been over that. But yeah, all right, let's move on. All right, this next submission is from Rumple. They want me to apologize for something. It says here, in an episode recently, you were discussing red flag movies. During a discussion regarding A Clockwork Orange, you mentioned the scene where Dim makes Alex lick his boot. So just chiming in here. If you're not familiar, the main character, Alex, is a very bad person, a very psychopathic, sadistic criminal, young person, gang member, and he is caught and incarcerated, and they put him through an experimental treatment program in which they make violence and rape and killing and blood associated with a lot of nausea and pain for him. And so they pry his eyes open and make him watch all these horrible scenes, and they give him drugs so that when he thinks about violence or sees violence or has an urge to commit violence, he has tremendous nausea and pain, and so it's supposed to reform psychopaths and criminals without having to incarcerate them. You're able to run him through this relatively short program so that you can release him into society, and they will never be violent again. And so he's gone through this treatment program, and as a demonstration to stakeholders, I think other psychiatrists and maybe government officials, Alex is on stage, and the lead psychiatrist is demonstrating the effectiveness, and they're saying, this is a fella who was very violent and killed people and da-da-da. And then on the stage, they have a authority figure, I think it's a prison guard or something, have Alex lick the bottom of his boot, which he never would have done before. Alex would have absolutely not done that. He would have been violent. And because Alex has been conditioned not to be violent, he actually does lick the bottom of this boot. And so apparently during the discussion with Berto about red flag movies, A Clockwork Orange, I mentioned, going on here, something in your words or affect at that moment gave the distinct impression that you felt this was acceptable and righteous. So just chiming in here. Well, maybe, and I feel like I do remember that. I feel like maybe it was in the conversation with Umberto, but yeah, okay, so I'll go with that I felt like Alex deserved to lick someone's boots because of the horrific murders and rapes that he committed. Yeah, I could see myself thinking that's appropriate punishment or humiliation to someone for the horrific things that they've done. I don't know where I stand politically or psychologically on that issue. If you're to ask me, should we humiliate people who are convicted of crimes and degrade them, I'd probably say no. But as a human, I think I might feel okay with it. Then you go on to say, is degrading someone acceptable or wise? Certainly someone like Jeremy Sherman seems to think so. And while he cites in his work something in the back of my mind senses a pretty serious conflict with the work of Amanda Ripley, I've perceived a tendency towards this judgment from a large number of people in the mental health field. End of submission. Okay. Well, Rumple, I have to read between the lines as to what you want me to apologize to you for. And I think this is another issue. Maybe this is a whole part of the system that I want to make explicit, a lot of these apology submissions that are in the section where I ask you, what do you want me to apologize to you for? A lot of what these submit, or not a lot, but at least this one, it's not clear what the transgression is. I don't know. And I guess if you were in front of me, I would go, okay, what was the transgression? What would you like me to apologize for? And I think this is, when I go back to the considerations for the components of an apology and how I talked about how one of the things that has to be present is the harmed individual has to have self-awareness. They have to have differentiation. They have to know what the transgression was. Because I imagine, I don't know, Rumple, for you, but given what you said here, there's a lot of possibilities. But I can imagine one possibility is that I, say something that indicates that I think it's okay to humiliate a convicted criminal and degrade them. And for you on the inside, something happens on the inside of you. It feels bad to you, but you don't necessarily know that feeling very well, but you do know the sentences that run through your mind. You start talking about Jeremy Sherman in your mind and Amanda Ripley, and all these counterpoints start coming up in your mind. But really what's happening for you deep down, and again, this is just one of 100 possibilities, deep down, you feel as though I think you should be humiliated and degraded, and that I feel that it was okay for people in your past to degrade and humiliate you. And that felt hurtful to you or scary to you. And you would like me to apologize for that. I don't know if that's what's happening, but if that is the transgression, then yes, I absolutely would strongly and sincerely apologize if I made it seem as though it's okay for you to be degraded or humiliated because of something that you did wrong, or someone perceived you as doing something wrong. If that happened to you and I said something that made it seem like that was okay to happen to you, then yeah, that's awful that I said something that would make you feel that way. So I say all this because if we just read your submission, I don't know what the transgression is, and I don't even necessarily know if you know. And that's okay. But when we as people, and again, this is the asynchronous problem, is you're not right in front of me, I'd be able to talk with you. But usually we're in the same room with people in these situations. And so it's okay to come to someone with an unrefined request for an apology, but then you have to use that as a starting point, right? And not get bogged down, because a lot of times what will happen in these situations, so let me bring it down to earth in a more normal situation. So let's say that you and your partner have been having tension lately, and what is really happening is there's distance and there's hurt for both people around distance. And one person is going, well, I don't know what's going on with my partner, but I'm just going to keep my distance because I think they're angry at me. And then the other partner is like, how come they won't talk to me? Why are they actively angry at me and not talking to me? Okay, so both people are misinterpreting each other's distance. Each person is distancing because they think the other person is distancing, but really they're both distancing at the same time and causing each other's distancing, right? Okay, so then one person, this goes on for a week or maybe a year. I mean, it can go on a long time in couples. And then finally one person goes, maybe it's the pursuing person, finally goes to the person and says, how come you never ask me to go on date nights anymore? Like, what's wrong with you, or something like that. And the verbatim criticism, or if you and there's no identification of a transgression, really, it's not explicit, and there's no direct ask for an apology, but to the other person, it's pretty clear. It's like, oh, they're hurt that I haven't asked them to go on a date night. But that's not actually what the problem is, right? Because the problem is actually that both people feel rejected by the other person. Date night is a part of that, but really, even if they had date night and there was still a lot of that distance and rejection, that the date night wouldn't have solved it, right? So the person says, how come you don't ask me for date night? And then the other person has to go with it and give some leeway and go like, okay, date night. I did ask you to go on date night last month and you said you couldn't do it. Okay. And then what'll happen if it's undifferentiated and unhealthy and there's no awareness of the overall picture, they'll get in a huge fight about date night. I did ask you for date night 6 months ago and you said you were going to spend time with your mom that day. And then there's all this, you said this and no, I didn't, and date night this, and you remember that one time 3 years ago when you said you didn't want to go on date night, and now you're trying to compete with each other and you're fighting about date night, when in reality, what's happening is at least one, if not both people, at their core, feel unloved and rejected. So for both people, they're both responsible for, getting it back on track. So, so say, this is me and my wife. So say she comes to me and she's like, you have not asked me for date night. Like, I'm angry at you. Like, I thought you said you were going to commit to being more available for date night. And then let's say I'm trying to zoom out and be differentiated a little bit. I'm just like, well, I did ask her for date night, but she said she couldn't. But that probably isn't really what's happening here. And she's trying in her way to try to fix the problem that I feel too. She's bringing up date night, but that's kind of weird, And so I say, well, okay, we could debate the whole date night thing, and I have some things to say, I guess, but where is this coming from? And say, Stacy, she's like, well, I don't know. I just feel like you've been angry at me lately. And then I'm like, oh, okay, we're getting closer to the core of the matter. And then I'm like, well, I'm not angry at you. And then this requires self-awareness from me, right? I have to be like, well, I probably am coming across like I'm angry, but really on the inside, I'm hurt. And I'm distancing myself, or I'm passive aggressively trying to communicate my hurt through distance or something. And then I have to at least kind of be aware of that. And I say, well, for me, I'm not angry. Maybe I'm a little angry, but really, I just feel like you've been rejecting me lately, like you don't want to be married to me or something. And and now we're going down a road of actually getting to the core of the matter instead of spiraling out of control about debating who asked who for date night. You know what I mean? So Rumple, when you give me this thing here, and you were in front of me, I would say like, okay, you're bringing up Jeremy Sherman and Amanda Ripley and Alex and A Clockwork Orange and the Red Flag movies. What exactly happened to you on the inside when I said what I said, or when I implied what I implied? What happened for you, inside of your heart? How did that affect you? What emotion did you have? Because I'm guessing that would be the core of the matter. And then I would be able to apologize for that. Because whereas if I engage with the way you started the conversation, I would go on this debate, I suppose, about whether or not I indicated that I approved the humiliation of a criminal. We could debate that, because it sounds like even in the words that you're providing, you're not sure if that's really what I was saying, because I can't imagine I would explicitly say something like that. I can imagine thinking that, and I can imagine implying that for sure. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but if I was defensive, or if I was trying to address the verbatim of what you provided, that's the direction it would go down. And I'm not saying you did something wrong. I'm just highlighting that when we all are given an opportunity to repair, whether we're the initiator or the complainer, if you will, or we're the receiver or the criticized individual, we all have a responsibility to route the conversation towards the core of the matter. And that's unknown to me. That's a big question mark to me, Rumple, from you. I don't know what the core of the matter is, but if you were here, I'd be able to ask that. Now, if you want to email in and provide that, then I would gladly entertain that for sure. But I want to reiterate, if my comment made you feel like I believe that it's okay that you were humiliated, that you were abused, that you were harmed because of real or imagined transgressions that you committed, and an authority humiliated you, an authority harmed you, degraded you, then that, if I indicated that, that's wrong. And I should be careful with how I word things, because that's not really how I think. And I should take into consideration that to be flippant about something like that could affect some of the listeners who have been through experiences like that. I should be careful with how I word things, So I am sorry for that. All right, so I think I'll make the rest of this episode just for patrons of the podcast. That's what I've been doing with the deep dive chapters. So if you want to hear the rest of this, you have to become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. When you become a patron of the podcast, you get access to this episode and the entire series on apologies and all the other deep dives. So do that if you want to. And please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.